To be with you here again today to look after things for the next 3 weeks while Father Brett's on leave. So looking forward to being with you those Sundays. A couple of years ago I had to change trains in Cologne in Germany. You know, these were the days when they used to be able to travel around. And I had time to visit the famous huge black cathedral right next to the Hauptbahnhof, which is the main station in Cologne. I was fascinated to find inside this cathedral a gold and silver shrine which is believed to contain the remains of the 3 wise men, or the 3 kings, whatever we call them. In fact, the huge Gothic cathedral was originally built in the 13th century to house and display these relics. And they were acquired in 1164, so they've been here a long time. The shrine was opened up in the 19th century because they, I guess, wanted to have a look inside and see what was in there. And they found it to contain the bones of 3 men. 1 young, 1 middle-aged, 1 old. And also a few coins and a few bits of clothing. So they put them all back in the shrine, put the shrine back into the cathedral, and there it stands to this day. But in spite of what is in Cologne Cathedral, we really know very little about the wise men, despite the story we tell in plays and songs around Christmas time. You know the one about how 3 wise men or kings arrived in Bethlehem right behind the shepherds to pay homage to the baby in a manger. The problem is that the visit is only mentioned in one of the Gospels, Matthew, and the story really doesn't sort of go much like that at all. Nowhere does the Bible tell us about 3 kings. The Greek text uses the word magi, a word related to our word magic. There were some sort of specialists in the occult, wise men, astrologers in fact. Probably like many of today's New Age practitioners, they took bits and pieces from various religious systems and put them together to construct their art. And we don't know whether there are 3 of them or 30. We only know that there were 3 gifts given. The Bible doesn't tell us any more than that. And the story in Matthew's Gospel doesn't tell us that the wise men came into the stable behind the inn which contained the manger. In fact, just the opposite. The story states that the wise men entered into a house where the Holy Family was. This last statement is really no surprise if you read the story found in the Gospel of Matthew carefully, because you discover in it that the wise men arrived in Bethlehem anything up to 2 years after the birth of Jesus, time enough for Mary and Joseph to have found a house and settle in, although why they were still in Bethlehem when they could have returned to Nazareth is not clear. And what was the star? A comet? A supernova, an alien spacecraft? We have no idea, none at all. But doesn't it really matter that the details of the story are confused? Like much of the Bible, the bare facts might not fit too well, but the Gospel account has a very important teaching point. The traditional explanation is that the visit of the Magi explains that Jesus was born for all people, not just his own people, the Jews. That's why, in traditional art and nativity sets, the figures of the wise men are shown differently. If you look at their 3 faces when you come up, you see they've got faces which express different parts of the world. There's one sort of fair-skinned man, one rather Asiatic looking, and one dark-skinned, sort of African looking. And also, as the relics in Cologne seem to have confirmed, very often, I don't think you can tell with these, but very often they're shown as one who's young and hasn't got a beard yet, one who's sort of middle-aged, and one who's sort of old and grey and bent over. So they show them that Jesus was born for all the different peoples of the world and all different ages. But let's look at their journey a bit more closely and find out exactly what made these figures so wise. The Magi were people who were really seeking for truth and wisdom, but they found it where they did not expect it. The Magi knew that the star they followed was special. They'd probably been searching the heavens for years for signs of something unique and significant occurring in their world. After all, in the darkness of desert nights, people watched the heavens all the time. They knew all about the ordered movements of the stars and would immediately recognize anything unusual. And they took these as being signs that something special, maybe from God or from wherever, was about to happen. So the Magi set forth in faith to find what the star pointed to, and not necessarily from the same place. They could well have come from different backgrounds, as the story expresses. But somehow they converged in the direction they believed the star was leading them. They had to travel from foreign places in search of the wisdom and truth which they believed the star pointed to. They didn't know where it would lead them, how long it would take, what the end result would be for them. They only knew that it was important for them to follow that star to wherever it led, in order to worship somebody or something very special indeed. So the Magi arrived in Jerusalem, and it seemed that they lost sight of the star when they got there. They knew they were in the right area, but they weren't yet at the right spot. That's like us sometimes. We're driving in an unfamiliar area to find an address. We get into the right neighbourhood, but somehow can't quite locate the street we're looking for. We're stuck, and remain stuck until we ask for help. Today our Harvest Mourner would like to pull out our phones and look at the map. But in those days, they asked for help. And they said, where is this Messiah to be born? We can't see any sign of it here. So the Magi asked for help. They wanted to know so they could go and worship the new king. And the question was answered by people who were familiar with the scriptures and the prophecies concerning the birth of the Messiah. It surely had to be, the scriptures said, in the nearby village of Bethlehem, the city of David. So they took that answer and they set forth. And when they did so, once again they saw the star over the place where Jesus was laying. When the wise men got to Bethlehem, they found that the birth of the king was nothing like they could have imagined. It wasn't a place of royal splendour and glory and wonder, but a very simple house. Nevertheless, they accepted what God led them to, and they believed in it. King Herod, of course, was interested in finding out where this new king was as well. And he said he wanted to worship him too. But of course we know that he would have found another king a threat, which is why he ordered the death of the newborn children in that area, which is a commemoration the church keeps on the 28th of December, but it's not usually made into a very big affair in the church's calendar. After this long and hard journey, the Magi ended up at a simple place. They found the carpenter and his wife and a child. No costly treasures, no purple robes, no gold rings, nothing, in fact, to show that they were in the presence of someone who was to one day be a great king. And they accepted this. All the outward signs, save the star, were telling them that they were in the wrong place, but they accepted that single sign, the sign of God that they'd followed so long, and knelt down and offered their gifts. So many of us sometimes have a hard time accepting what God has given to us in the form that it takes. Very often we wait for things to come from God that are spectacular, miraculous, instant healings, signs in the heavens, trumpets sounding, all that sort of thing. But very often we ignore the signs that God has come near to us in another person, for instance. Someone who's wanting our help. Someone who's wanting our love. Someone who's just dropping by unannounced. Or a client showing up when we're preparing to leave work for the day. We can so often lose sight of the fact that God might very well appear to us in the ordinary aspects of life. We don't expect to find God when we're working in our office or sitting in a classroom or doing dishes at the kitchen sink. We find it hard to consider that God's answers to our questions can be found in a 2,000-year-old book, or on the lips of our employees or our friends, or even in a dream that we had during the night. We look for supernatural things, but very often God appears in the here and now, in the everyday encounters of life. And that's what the Epiphany story tells us so clearly. The coming of God as man that first Christmas took place in the most ordinary and unspectacular way. A humble birth in simple surroundings to simple people. So why were the wise men so wise? Well, their wisdom was that first they were searching for something. They were expecting something special to happen. Then they were willing to set forth in faith on a probably difficult journey or journeys to personally discover what God was doing. And when they thought they might have lost sight of where they were going, they did not hesitate to ask for help along the way. And finally, they accepted what they found, even though it was unimpressive and certainly not regal, and they believed it.